Welcome everyone to episode 12 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. Now, if you've never listened to this podcast before, I'm going to tell you what to expect. Me and Andrew are average anglers from Ontario. We fish multi-species for all kinds of fish throughout the year. And we're going to kind of describe some of our stories that we've experienced, also some of the tricks and the tips that we have accumulated over the last 20 plus years of fishing. So today the episode is actually about muskie fishing basics, and we're going to kind of talk about early season muskie a bit because, as we know, muskie season is just around the corner, and it's something that me and Andrew have really become obsessed with the last few years.
Yeah,
haven't you, Andrew?
I love it.
But today we're going to talk about early season muskie fishing, some of the baits we use that we've had success with, as well as the equipment that we're going to use and locations to find these fish. But before we get into that, we'd actually just like to quickly talk about our podcast sponsor of the week. So our podcast sponsor of the week is Beeline Baits.
Yeah.
Beeline Baits is an Ontario local bait maker, and he makes some pretty sick baits. He's actually donated 4 6-inch perch swim baits, which you saw.
He does a really good job in the pour.
His paint jobs are,
really nice.
I'd say, one of the better ones. Like, no offense to other people, but his are really good.
Well, I think those ones that he showed, those color patterns are in the pour itself, I think.
Yeah, I don't know how the heck he does it.
They
It's some
look
kind of
really
wizardry,
good.
but it's very good. And the cool thing is he actually makes a very unique chatterbait. It's a chatterbait type contraption, like a bladed jig, but musky size. And it has a big beast hook, like Texas rig hook on it. And you are supposed to pair one of those big 6-inch swim baits onto it.
Yeah.
So the
now
giveaway,
you have a nice musky sized chatterbait that is pretty much weedless because you can Texas rig those baits.
For sure. And yeah, we know pike and muskie have big teeth, but you're getting 4 swim baits, so it'll last you a little bit.
Yeah.
We're going to go more into that giveaway after the interesting fishing fact. But again, we'd like to thank Beeline Baits for sponsoring this episode, which is Muskie Fishing Basics, Early Season Muskie. But we're going to get into the interesting fishing fact now, and we have the one and only man with a mustache, Andrew. This better be interesting.
Well, I'll do my best.
Okay.
We're consulting the Bible again.
Oh, the Bible. Okay.
The Freshwater Fishermans Bible by Vlad Evanoff.
I'll tell you, that Vlad guy got pretty popular after our last podcast.
Really?
Everyone was saying his name.
Only because that was the answer for the giveaway.
It was true.
So, this is chapter 12 in the book, Muskelunge. So I thought I'd read a couple, again, fun excerpts from this.
Okay.
See how smart this Vlad guy was when it came to muskie back in the, 60s, I think?
I think it was like 1964.
Yeah, I think it was, I'll tell you right now.
It's been a few years.
Yeah, it was 64. How did you remember that?
My memory is pretty good when it comes to random fishing facts.
I listened to the podcast 17 times.
My wife's like, did you buy milk? No, but I remember from this podcast 3 weeks ago.
So, the muskie. They're described as a moody, temperamental, unpredictable, tricky fish.
I agree with that.
Yep. And it makes a real trophy.
Yep.
Now, there are some names here. I'd like you to take a crack. This is always fun at spur of the moment. Take a crack at reading these weird names, Jesse.
I can't read.
So the Muskelunge is known by many different names, usually different spelling versions of the more popular one. Thus, you'll see them called Masquinong, Masquilonge, Muskelunge. We'll send a picture on our Instagram because these names are messed.
I've never heard that. Sounds made up.
I'm like, what was this guy on?
Yeah.
Come on, Vlad, clean it up.
You picked the wrong type of mushrooms that day.
So, his recommendations for gear for it says a fairly stiff bait casting rod from 5 to 6 feet long with an extra long handle is most suited for this fishing. A good quality bait casting reel, preferably one that has a star drag. The reel should hold at least 100 yards of braided nylon or Dacron or monofilament line testing from 15 to 25 pounds.
15 pounds, wow.
This seems pretty light to me, but maybe that's just because modern day we fish totally differently.
Yeah.
And then he says a heavy freshwater spinning rod, or 6 to 7 feet long, or a light saltwater spinning rod of the same weight that can cast lures up to 2 ounces. And then it says, for the spinning rod, monofilament lines testing from 8 to 15 pound.
8?
I'm going to target muskie with an 8-pound main line. What do you think, Jesse?
I mean, sure. Maybe in like a muskie hatchery.
And it's funny that the baits he's talking about, like underwater plugs, 6, 7, even 8 inches long.
Which would be pretty medium sized nowadays.
Yeah. And it's funny too because he starts talking about the best fishing, which is I would say is pretty accurate. That usually takes place on the dark, windy, rainy days when the surface of the water is choppy or even rough.
Yeah.
He also says that the best fishing is from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. I don't get that.
Okay.
I'd
say like the opposite of that, but okay. I'm not the writer of this Bible, so what do I know?
Now, again, this is from the 60s, and I don't know why they were keeping muskie, but he talks about how if you catch a muskie from a spot, it won't take long for another one to come in once the occupant is removed. It's like, yes, because we all target muskie for food.
When that muskie's on the barbecue, another fish will swim in and take its home.
It is talking about how to locate muskie. So he says one way to locate a muskie is to see one.
Ah, you don't say.
Specifically, when it breaks water to catch a big frog, mouse, rat, muskrat, chipmunk, squirrel, duckling, gosling, or other small animal.
Oh.
It's like that
happens all the time.
You can find them when you see them. Wow. Another interesting fact, which he says is to retrieve the lures fairly fast for muskellunge. In fact, surface plugs are often reeled so fast that they skitter on top. I could see that working at times.
Yeah.
But then he says, other times an erratic retrieve will interest the fish, but fast, medium, or slow, the lure should be lifelike and moving at all times. Which is contrary to the story I told earlier where it hit at a dead stop.
Well, they're unpredictable.
So, again, even at this time, he talks about them following your bait, which they do all the time.
They've been doing that since the beginning of time.
So he says, when this happens, speed up your retrieve. And this is when you can see the wake approaching behind. So speed up your retrieve, and then when it gets near the boat, don't take the lure out of the water. Instead, swish the lure around alongside the boat in a circle or figure 8 pattern. Which, again, is something that we still do to this day.
Yeah, if you have a fish following, speed up, don't slow down.
Yeah. And something that he says interesting is when he's seeing, he says when you see the wake behind further out, like speed up, do something different. Because again, that's something that a lot of guys don't do, and I know that you and I were talking before about it, where trying to elicit strikes from muskie when they're not beside the boat. Mm-hmm. You know, make changes to your bait, do those weird things to your bait, drop it, pick it up quick, like jerk it, something to get that strike hopefully further out from the boat so it's not going to get spooked when it sees you potentially.
And it's hard though, because like say you're reeling at topwater and you see a wake coming, your natural reaction is to slow the bait down to let the fish get it, but you can't reel fast enough for a muskie not to grab your bait. You 100%. You want the bait to like pretend it's a real minnow. Like if a muskie's coming up on it, it's not going to slow down. It's going to swim for its life faster.
And the last 2 points here are I'd like to get your opinion on if this is a way that you would target and fish for muskie.
Okay.
So it's recommended when you're using suckers. So you have a live or dead sucker. A muskie will grab the small fish in the middle. And it says, once the fish has it, don't pull on the line. Wait while the fish makes up its mind to swallow the sucker. This might take a few minutes or as long as an hour.
I
a muskie has it. Let me eat my sandwich.
That seems a bit long.
So now, after that, you've now waited up to an hour for the muskie to now swallow your sucker.
Okay.
Now you set the hook, you're fighting the fish. A muskie should be played until it gives up and turns over on its side. Then you can use a wide-mouthed net to scoop up the smaller fish. If the fish is large, it is better to gaff it through the lower lip or jaw. Some expert anglers and guides grab the muskie in the eye sockets.
Ooh.
It's like, wow. Yep, sounds like a great catch and release fishery.
Well, this is before that became popular, obviously, but yeah, it's pretty barbaric.
So we're joking around about the, targeting muskie on lighter lines, but he does at this time, and I believe it's still the record might still stand. I'm not sure. I didn't forget to look at that, but the biggest fish at this time was a 67-pound, 15-ounce muskie caught in the St. Lawrence River on an 11-pound test.
I that's not accurate now, but yeah, it's close to 70 pounds. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's again on light line. I think even the record now,
which there is some debate about the record now in Ontario, but it was also caught with a guy walleye fishing. So yeah.
So again, can you land it? Yes, but if you're targeting them, generally you go with
bad idea.
Yeah, use gear that you can actually use to cast your baits and effectively land a fish without tiring it out so it lays on its side.
Yeah,
and it's basically dead before you land it.
Then you have to throw it on the barbecue.
And you grab it in the eye sockets and lift it up for a nice photo.
This is what you don't do. So don't take clips of this out of context.
So I'm going to go target muskie next year with this 8-pound line and a 5-foot rod, extra heavy, and I think we'll do all right.
Yeah. I mean, you'll get them to hit the lure. When you set the hook, the line will snap.
So what do you think? How did that rank on interesting?
You know what? It's not interesting as more as it is comical. So on a comical scale, I'll give that an 82.
Okay.
Out of 800. Just kidding. Out of 100. That's good. You know what, though? We had a lot of good feedback about reading out of the Vlad's, what is it called? The Freshwater Fisherman's Bible from 1964. So we're going to probably do another one next month, too, in June. So I enjoy it.
There's a lot of species that it covers in here. So we have, again, when I go through it, I start underlining and highlighting stuff. I'm perusing all of it so that I can give you the interesting stuff.
The best
the best misinformation you can possibly have
outdated
for targeting these species.
But yeah, it is interesting for sure. And we have a lot of other old books that we can definitely look into as well.
We grew up reading them. Yeah.
Go to Value Village, you'd find an old fishing book and be like,
exactly where this came from.
Yeah, Trout Fisherman's Digest from 1971. Yeah, it's pretty funny. But anyway, that was interesting. So now we're going to get into our main topic.
Which may or may not have more accurate information.
Yeah. And again, we're average anglers. Me and Andrew, we fish multi-species. We're not experts on any given fish, but we put in the work and we catch fish.
And as soon as we put on these hats, we are experts when it comes to muskie.
Maniacs hats. Yeah. So you buy one of these hats, instantly you're going to catch a fish.
Yep.
That's what I was told when I bought it anyway.
Yeah.
I think I got swindled.
Why did mine cost $50?
He had magical musky dust on
$1 for every inch. I'm like, whoa.
Yeah. But anyway, again, we're going to share. We've caught our fair share of muskies. We're always learning. We're looking to improve ourselves, but we're going to share what's worked for us and what we've learned and what we've learned from other guides and other experienced musky anglers over the years that we've talked to. So we're going to kind of talk, because like right now, like it's almost June. When this podcast is coming out, it's almost June, and muskie season opens early June in the Kawarthas, and in Northern Ontario, it opens later in June, like mid to I think the second or third week of June. So it's really going to depend where in Ontario you live. But the reason why muskie season opens that late, like most species, like most seasons, is to protect the spawning fish.
Yes. Pike will spawn under the ice, but muskie spawn later.
Yeah. So muskie spawn in the spring anywhere between April and June, which makes sense because down here in the Kawarthas, muskie opens the first Saturday in June, which is early June. So the fish spawn between April and June when the water temperature is between 10 and 15 or 50 and 60 degrees. So the water's still cold. It's spring. It's not summer until June 21st or something like that, right? So they're spawning in early spring or mid-spring. And where do they spawn? The same areas that pike spawn in, basically shallow, weedy areas, bays, inlets with soft bottom vegetation. Mm-hmm. You're seeing areas that have typically like lily pads and reeds and milfoil and cabbage and stuff like that.
And muskies like current, so they can actually swim and they'll spawn like up streams, and you'll see them jump like it's
they'll
crazy.
Go up some pretty sketchy backwaters to get to spawn. So after they spawn, so obviously you can't fish for them when they're spawning, but after they spawn, that's generally when the season opens. So fish that you're targeting are post-spawn fish. They've already spawned. So how do you target these fish? Where are they? So generally muskie, after they spawn in these shallow, weedy areas, they're going to relate to those same areas for a few weeks. And you have to think, the spawning fish, it's spawning for any fish. It's vigorous. It takes a lot out of these fish.
Yeah.
And muskie and pike, we know, they get pretty cut up and bruised. Like these fish fight each other and they've got big cuts, and you'll notice that a lot of their fins are bleeding. Like they get pretty roughed up from their spawn. So after these muskie are done spawning, again, they're relating to shallow cover. they're not going to spawn and immediately swim out into the middle of the lake where it's deep. They're not going to do that. They're tired. Yeah. And what are they going to do? They're going to start eating, okay? They are very finicky and sulky, just like bass after they spawn. There's always that period of time after the spawn where fish are kind of sulky.
Yes.
Same thing. So these fish, they're gonna still be in the shallows, and they may push off to the first deep area. So like say they're spawning in 2 to 3 or 4 feet of water. After the spawn, when muskie season opens, they may push off to that first weed line. Generally speaking, like it could be anything, but like 6 to 10 feet of water. Yep. They're not going to go to their midsummer deep holes yet. They're still going to be in those shallow areas, which is great because the average angler, it's easy to target them. You can even shore fish for them, like we talked last week. You can fish for them in canoes, kayaks, small tin boats. You're not going out on these big bodies of water. These fish are right shallow.
Yep.
So it's easy to target them. So what do you look for? Say you're out and you've never targeted muskie before, and muskie season just opened. What do you look for? What are you looking for?
I look for weeds. Again,
what kind of weeds?
Green weeds.
Green weeds, yeah.
100%. You want that new growth. The purpose you want weeds is every fish in a weedy lake is going to correlate primarily to weeds, except for like lake trout, stuff like that. But bass, your muskie, walleye, they look at weeds because that's where the minnows are, because that's where the crustaceans are, that's where the nymphs are, that's where the oxygen is for the like everything. It's all stemming off of the plant life. So as soon as you find green weeds, that is like the bottom of that food pyramid that is going to, or the bottom of the food chain, and the muskie are at the top.
Yeah.
So they're feeding on everything else that is in those weeds.
Exactly. And you have to think again, these muskie, they're tired. They're exhausted after spawning. They're not going to go searching the whole lake for food when in the shallows, all the bait fish and bass
it's coming to them.
Like bass are coming shallow to spawn.
Yep.
Walleye are still shallow in that time of year, like early June anyway. They're there. They're wanting to feed on these
Frogs
things.
are coming out.
Yep.
Ducklings are out.
Ducklings are just hatching.
Yeah.
Everything that they want to
Muskrats
eat,
coming out of their banks and homes. Like
it's all there.
Yeah.
So again, target shallow areas or not super deep areas anyway. That's generally what we do. We do fish a lot of the Kawartha Lakes where there are a lot of like shallow bays and there are tons of muskie in them. Yep. Even throughout the summer, we're mostly talking about early season here. So again, healthy weeds, they are looking for an easy meal. Again, muskie are ambush predators. They're going to find a nice, a log or even under a dock sometimes, or a big clump of lily pads or a weed line, and they're just going to sit there, wait for something stupid to swim by, and they're just going to go out and eat it. Now, we're going to talk about baits that you're going to use, because I know a lot of people, they think, oh, muskie fishing, you need to use these huge baits. And again, like we've all got caught up in it. We all have our large baits. But we're going to kind of talk early season is generally, most people will tell you, most experienced muskie anglers that I've talked to anyway, they're always like, use smaller baits, small baits. And I've caught more muskie myself while bass fishing or walleye fishing than when muskie fishing.
Yep.
Especially early season. Like I know something when bass season first opens and we're fishing shallow bays with, frogs or flipping baits, I'll catch muskie all the time.
Yeah,
100%.
Well, you'll get muskie blow up in your bait and then instantly lose it all the time.
I have landed some though too. But like I've caught muskie on 3-inch flipping baits.
Yeah.
And you'll just flip your bait in, you'll feel a tap just like a bass at the hook, and boom, it's a 30-inch muskie.
Yeah.
Or a 35-inch, even big ones.
One of the things that some guys will tell you is to catch muskie, fish for bass with slightly larger baits.
Yeah.
Like that's a bit heavier gear. They're in the same areas. They're there for the same reason, because bass are a predator fish, muskie are a predator fish. Again, they're doing the exact same thing.
And muskie, especially early season, they're not always looking for a huge meal.
Yes.
You have to think,
they're opportunistic feeders.
Say you're tired and all beat up, just like a muskie that just finished spawning. You may not want to eat the huge steak dinner. You may just be like, I just want a snack. I want a snack here, a snack there. They don't want to eat some huge meal like a big walleye or a bass. They may just want to eat a bunch of perch.
Well, you come home from work and you don't feel like cooking your big steak dinner. If it was provided for you, you'd eat it. But
you don't want
at
to
the
hunt
same
it
time,
down.
if you got to prepare your own food, you're like, hey, that bag of chips is easy.
For sure. A snack. So we're going to go through some of the baits. Like right on the table here, we have a whole bunch of baits that are large muskie baits, and then smaller baits that we'd actually recommend more for spring.
Just so anyone listening, if they heard a rattle there, Jesse has this weird habit I've noticed. Wherever you set a bunch of like open exposed hooks on a table, at some point Jesse will like throw his hand on it, and kind of like shake him around a bit, and it freaks me out every time.
I actually work with my hands for a living, so my calluses are thick enough that these hooks are not going to penetrate. I don't know what Andrew does with his weird pipes, plumbing pipes, but anyway. So we're going to talk about some of the baits, and then we're going to talk about the baits that we personally like to use. So here's what not to use in the early spring. Now, again, these are generally like principles.
Yes.
You can
There are
catch fish
exceptions.
on big baits. So crankbaits. So what Andrew has in his hand right now is a big 10-inch Jake. It's a crankbait. It's a big minnow bait. It's 10 inches
Often
long.
used for trolling.
Yeah, huge bait, 4-5 ounces, something like that. That's not what you want to use. Here is the exact same lure, but the 6-inch model. There is quite a difference. This bait here is actually about 1.25 ounces.
Yep.
It's a small bait, and generally, what else could you catch on this? Is this a musky bait? It is a musky bait, but
Bass would nail that.
It's basically
even big walleye.
Oh,
would,
100%.
Nail that.
Pike, walleye, bass.
Yep.
It looks like a bass bait on steroids.
Yep.
It's slightly thicker. It has bigger musky hooks on it.
Better hooks that won't bend out.
What I always say to people is if you're fishing for muskie or big pike, it's better to use a small muskie lure than a big bass lure, just because muskie lures are built tougher. They've got thicker split rings. They've got bigger hooks. Like Andrew said about the Rapala.
Yeah.
If you hook a muskie on a small bass bait, yeah, you can land them.
I was very fortunate that those hooks, like they were bending out. They did technically fail.
Yep.
I was very fortunate that
split rings
they
too
didn't open all the way, and I lost the muskie. And that's only because I had my drag set real low, and it took me longer than I would like.
And that
to
wasn't on a
land that
muskie
fish.
rod. That was on just a 7-foot medium heavy. So there are a lot of options for small crankbaits, and the one that I picked up this year that I'm really excited to try is it's a 6-inch Jake, but it's the squirrely Jake, so it actually has only 2 treble hooks, and on the back there's actually a twister tail glued onto the back.
Yep.
Other popular baits, the shallow raider, the 5-inch shallow raider is a very popular spring bait. 5-inch or 6-inch slammers, very popular, and they're small, but again, fish this time of year, they're not looking to eat big baits. Small snacks. So crankbaits like that, you can fish these a lot of ways. You can just cast them and reel them in. You can also fish them like a dive and rise, kind of like jerk them down, let them float up, jerk them down. That's more of a reaction bite. You can also troll them. So another good thing. Okay, we're going to do another one of what not to do. So when it comes to musky fishing, everyone will tell you bucktails. You know, bucktails are big spinners. Now, Andrew's going to hold up. I have here a Muskie Munchies triple tickler big bucktail.
It's an awesome bait.
It's an awesome bait in the late summer and fall. It is a 3.5 ounce huge, like double 10 size bucktail. And it's big. It's a big bucktail. Lots of disturbance in the water. Fantastic bait, but not exactly what you'd want to chuck in the spring. It's a little bit too big, like we're saying. Not that you couldn't catch one in the spring. So other baits, generally, Andrew has one now he just bought. A classic bait, and it may seem too small for muskie, but it's not, believe us.
So this is the Mepps Black Fury 5, and it's a dress treble. And this one here has like a really thick gauge hook. Like this is definitely a musky grade hook on
Isn't that the musky killer, though?
This isn't the musky killer, because the musky killer is based off the Aglia. So this is the Black Fury. And from what I remember, I believe. But the packaging here doesn't say musky killer.
Okay, I think this is the musky killer because I remember it saying that on the packages.
The musky killer has the trailer hook, I believe.
Yeah, this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this one does. I opted for this one because it doesn't have a trailer hook. However, the size is beefed up on this of the actual hook itself. So this is I would say that's almost like pike rated hooks. I would say this is like musky grade hooks. 100%.
These will be fine for. This is literally a musky killer though, so the hooks will be fine. But yeah, so the musky killer, this one that I have has the double hooks on the back. So it's a regular one, but it has an extra hook on the back. Is that an advantage? Possibly. But a lot of bucktails, when they're single, they just have one hook, and the hooking advantage is pretty good. Yep. Both of these baits are very light.
Yeah,
they're less than, I think they're about 1 ounce. They're small, they're manageable. You can chuck these on almost. We're gonna get into tackle for using smaller baits, but these Mepps musky killers, almost everyone will tell you just chuck one of these, you'll catch fish. Yeah. Especially when you're looking to get bites. You may not catch the biggest muskie ever on these. You can, but you will get lots of bites on them. And at the same time, when I've been using these, I've caught really big pike. I've caught bass. No problem. It's just a big spinner.
Yeah.
And that's, again, it's a snack. Other popular spinners that I've caught fish on is the Booker tails.
Yeah.
These are classics. This is the 500. This is the 700. They're just, one's a 500 size blade. It's just like the same size as basically a Mepps Muskie Killer.
Yep.
And the 700 just has a size 7 blade. So it's a single 7. And they're not that big. You can cast these on, heavy bass tackle for the 500 anyway. And they're easy to retrieve.
Another one too that I don't have it with me, but it's the beaver tail spinners.
Yeah.
And what's cool about those is they're a lot lighter than normal. So they don't have the super heavy lead weight in the body. And if you're fishing shallow water, or you want to do a much slower retrieve for, if it's still really cold water where you're at or something like that, those they retrieve a lot shallower than normal, and you can fish them at a slower rate. Yeah. So they're just a nice alternative to have, or diversity in your spinners.
Especially if you're fishing shallow, it might be better to have.
Or trying to keep it above the weeds or something like that if there's a lot of new growth. So that way, that one is a nice one I like for fishing above weeds. If I want an inline spinner, I go for the beaver tail.
For sure. And again, bucktails, these little small spinners may not be considered a bucktail, but we're talking about just inline spinners generally.
Yeah.
But the smaller ones, I'd say throughout June and even into July, they're really effective, and you can actually reel them in pretty fast in the summer too. I actually caught, I was fishing for muskie last year, and on this Buchertail 700, I actually caught a pretty big channel catfish on it when I was muskie fishing. And I thought I had a big muskie on, and I was fighting this thing, and it came up beside the canoe, and it was a big channel cat. And I was like, oh, I was kind of disappointed, but at the same time,
I was gonna say,
super freaked out. I was like, this is awesome. So you may think, you know what? I'm fishing, and there's lots of weeds. Sometimes you'll chuck out a spinner and just you're bringing in weeds all the time, and you're like, what the heck, they're effective, but if you're fishing around shallow weeds, a spinner bait is a better option. So Andrew is going to pick the bigger one. So the one that Andrew's holding is actually, it's not the big one not to use. That's a slightly bigger one. So that one is actually, I haven't used it yet. It's new from
Handlebars,
and it's his egghead.
Yeah,
and that is, I think it's like 1.5 ounces or 2 ounces.
Yeah.
It's a very cool spinner bait. It's not a giant one. It is a little on the bigger side. I probably wouldn't use that super early season, but throughout the summer, 100%.
It is nice. Just as a little mention on this, the hook on these comes really far back.
Yeah,
which is nice.
And it's a replaceable.
Yeah, and it just has shrink wrap on it, so you can cut that, replace it, new shrink wrap. You're good to go. So that one is nice. And another little point about these, I'm just excited because I like these.
Yeah,
is with the egghead, it's got a loose weighted head. So this lead is loose. And I know when we've fished spinnerbaits before for muskie, you catch one and the frame's all bent and the lead gets loose. This is designed to be loose. So you don't have to worry about it getting mangled. You can just bend the frame back in place. This thing is going to be good to go.
Yeah. So again, it's made of thick wire. Yeah. You can swap the blades on it depending on the conditions. And if you do have to cut a hook off,
if it's hooked deep, cut it, you can just get a new one.
And it's replaceable. On a normal spinnerbait, if you cut the hook off, you have to buy a new one. So that's one I'm excited to use. But our favorite early season spinnerbait is the Blackfly Lures Big Bastard, which there's lots of brands that make spinnerbaits this size. But this size, it's actually a 3/4 ounce. So it's not a big bait. Yeah. You can chuck this on normal gear.
I find a lot, even the smaller framed muskie baits, muskie spinner baits, they're usually around 1 ounce. I usually find, and they run deeper than I'd like. Because again, I'm trying to fish this around weeds, and they're just sinking too deep into the weeds. They're no longer weedless for me. Yeah. So I really like this one. This is actually the one that I caught my second muskie on. First one on a figure 8 pattern. Yeah. And it was on this, not this exact one, but the same. Yeah,
same color or same size.
Yeah.
But the big bastard, it's again, like we talked about this on our
on the Blackfly Lure giveaway.
But it's the good in between size. It's a slightly big bass lure or a small muskie lure, and that's exactly what you want in early season muskie fishing. And they're fairly inexpensive, and he has a ton of really good colors. This color particularly, you've seen this, it's all chotched up.
Yeah.
I have a black twister tail on my trailer hook. This is a black and orange color with like these black perch blades. But that for me is black and orange. For me is a hard color not to use.
The one I caught mine on was black and red.
Yeah, black. Yeah. It's hard to beat black.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a good spinner bait. And again, there's lots of brands that make small pike musky size spinner baits. That's just the one we like because again, they're made local too in Ontario, and we like to support our local bait makers.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
All right, so here's the next one. I like this. This is fun.
I love when we get a bunch of stuff out. We start talking about it.
Yeah,
especially when you can stay focused on a single topic. I find that's when we shine.
All right, so Andrew has in his hand now, this is not a large bait. This is a 9-inch suic. So this is a dive and rise bait. So if you're not familiar with a dive and rise bait, it's basically a bait that it generally floats. And as you jerk your rod down, it dives down, just like the name says. And then when you give it some slack, it rises up. Mm-hmm. So it seems like a bait that doesn't do absolutely anything. But these have been around for decades.
It's the kind of thing when I bought mine, I cast it out like a couple times, retrieved it, and like, this thing sucks.
Yeah, it's a
I
suic.
had no clue how to actually fish it because I didn't read the package.
But the baits are designed for triggered bites. So if you jerk that thing down right by a fish's head, he's going to slam it.
Yeah.
Just by reaction. They don't have a choice.
Which we saw.
Yeah. And I actually caught a really nice fish last year on a suic, which was fantastic. So that is the 9-inch. There's also 10-inch, there's 12-inch, and there's even the one they call the Franken suic, which is 14-inch. Don't use that one in June.
Yeah.
Okay. What I have in my hands is one of their this is their second smallest one. This is a 7-inch suic. It's a smaller bait, does the same thing, but it's 7 inches, which generally, again,
it's a great size.
Could you catch bass and walleye on that?
100%.
100%. Can you catch muskie on it? Yes. So early season, just try to avoid. I know it's cool to chuck the big baits and use the big rods. Chuck the slightly smaller baits, and I almost guarantee you'll actually hook more fish.
Yeah. Fall is generally the time when they recommend to use larger baits because they're putting on a big feed before the cold weather comes.
Yeah.
But if you're looking to get into muskie fishing, spring is a great time because you have these baits that you can cast on your, heavy power rod that you're using for bass. Again, it might be tougher to land your fish, so it is best to use something, a proper musky rod for the fish's sake. But again, the colder water, they have a better chance of surviving. The warmer water, the more stress they'll get. Yep. You can cast regular size baits, so you don't have to have a bunch of specialized gear to target them in the spring.
Yeah. And again, we're going to get more into tackle in a second. So we have a few more baits we're just going to cover quick of comparison. So pick up that big Medusa. So if you know anything about muskie fishing, you probably, one category of muskie lures is rubber. And what Andrew has in his hand is the regular Medusa.
Yeah.
Which may look massive to you. If you're into muskie fishing, you're like, oh, that's the small one. So
it's not the pounder. Come on.
Yeah. So that particular one is 8 ounces.
Yeah.
So it's half pound. They go up to more than a pound, believe me.
I think the biggest one was
the Magnum.
16 or 18 ounces.
I think there's one bigger than the pounder. Yeah, the Magnum. It's giant. And again, depends on what body of water you live on. Some lakes, they have giant fish in them, and they use these big 1-pound baits. Other lakes, like the Kawarthas, not saying you can't catch fish on 1-pound baits, but generally smaller baits get the nod by most guides and fishermen.
Yes.
So the one you have in your hand, would I throw that in the Kawarthas? 100% I would. Not in early spring, though.
Yes.
Okay? Or in June. So this one I'm holding in my hands, this is the mini Medusa. This particular one is only 2.5 ounces instead of 8 ounces. So it's not, it may be like a third of the weight, but it's not a third of the size.
Yeah.
It's half the size.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's not as big. Can you still catch fish on it? 100%.
Yes.
Throughout the year? Yeah. And it's casting these big rubber baits, it's hard on the shoulder. So if you're just getting into muskie fishing and you want to get one rubber bait just to try it out, try the mini Medusa, or the next one up is called the mid Medusa, which is a little bit bigger. But I generally, if you're just getting into it, try mini Medusa. They're about 3 ounces or something like that. And they're pretty easy to throw, and they still catch big fish.
They give off a lot of like vibration into the water with their curly tail here too, and like the triple tail, and that thing has a lot of movement in the water.
And just to describe this, if you're listening to this podcast, it is, imagine a
Godzilla with 3 tails,
a twister tail, a massive twister tail with 3 twister tails on it, with 2 treble hooks glued into it. It has an internal weight, so it's kind of a bait that you cast out. And you can not fish this bait wrong. You can literally straight retrieve these.
Yeah.
You can rip them through weeds.
Yeah.
You can just kind of pause them, let them sink down, pull them.
You can like rip them off the bottom.
You
like
can
jig them pretty much.
Yep. And fish, they love them. They're popular for a reason. They're probably one of the most popular rubber baits, either these or bulldogs. So again, smaller baits get the nod. And then right now we're just going to go through a few small baits that if you don't own specific musky tackle, these are baits that you could chuck. Mm-hmm. So one that I used quite a bit last year was the Super Shad Wrap. The Super Shad Wrap, it's not a small bait, but I've caught bass on these.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. These are good for bass, pike, walleye guys use them. Muskie, they're really popular for muskie. They're about 5.5 inches long. They're not big. Yeah. They're made of balsa wood, so they actually don't weigh that much.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact weight off the top of my head. But
The old ones are balsa wood. The new ones they have there are made of plastic, but again, they're not crazy heavy at all.
And again, straight retrieve. You control these. You can fish these like a dive and rise.
Yeah.
You can rip them through the weeds. Work good. And another one is a twitch bait. The twitch and wrap I like. This is not a heavy bait. I think these are only 4 inches long.
Yeah.
But it's like a glide bait, side to side, and that can trigger strikes as well. Now, if you just have heavy bass tackle, some of the baits that, especially in the spring, and again, we don't recommend using heavy bass tackle if you're actually targeting muskie, but if you're fishing some bodies of water, like there are some bodies of water that I know the biggest muskie you'll ever catch there is 30 inches.
Yeah.
Which literally is not even 10 pounds. So if you're using heavy bass tackle, that's fine.
Yep.
So some baits that you can chuck on those, Andrew has.
So regular like swim bait. This is a weighted hook, and it also has an underspin blade on it.
Yep.
But this one here, again, this is something that is a bass-sized bait. So
Yep.
I think it's the X-Zone Swammer on this one,
It's
right?
a mega swimmer, 5.5 inch. Yep.
So like this is something that like we've consistently caught bass on in the summer, and that's what we'll throw.
Pike, bass, walleye.
But again, something this size, like this is what the muskie's hitting in the springtime. They're seeing these bait fish come in exactly this size. This is what they're feeding on because this is what there's numbers of in there.
Match the hatch.
So if you can start casting something like this around, you can cast it on your regular bass rod, like your heavy cover bass rod, and you could land like a mid-sized muskie on this.
Yeah, for sure. And again, a lot of the biggest muskies ever caught have been caught just on bass gear.
And again, even the hooks on these, it's a big single hook. So the hook shank is thick enough to be able to get into on a good hook set, get into the muskie's mouth, and hold on without straightening out.
Yeah, because those hooks, those are the owner flashy swimmers, and they're designed for fishing for double-digit bass.
Yeah.
So they're thick.
Yeah. So these hooks, I have more confidence in something like this than a smaller treble hooked, like large bass bait. Like this is solid.
Another bait, if you just have to run into Canadian Tire, Walmart, or something, if you're going up to the cottage, is the Storm.
The GT360.
GT360. The one I'm holding is 5.5 inch. I think this is a 1/2 ounce head, and then it's got the tail. I think this whole bait out the door is less than an ounce.
This is the bait that you caught like a 3-pound largemouth on.
Just hanging over the side of the boat, yeah.
Eating a sandwich, and then a bass ate the swim jig.
But again, it's 5.5 inch, just the same as that last swim bait. It's not a giant bait, but maybe if you fish for panfish or trout, this is a huge bait to you.
Yeah,
it's a sizable bait.
Before, when my heaviest rod was a medium action bass rod, and I use that for pike and everything, and like I would never dream of casting something like that.
Yeah.
But again, once I actually started fishing cover for bass, I needed to get a heavier action rod. So I get a heavy action or a medium heavy. Now I'd have no issue casting something like that on it.
100%.
I'd feel completely comfortable.
And again, anyone can cast this. You just check it out and reel it in. Pretty easy. Other things you can use, jerk baits. This is just like a regular bass size jerk bait, and it's just like a 5 inch. This is a Duo Realis jerk bait. Nothing fancy there. Jointed rapple, like Andrew said at the intro. Like this is a bait that catches tons of big fish, and it's inexpensive. They're easy to fish. You can troll them. You can cast them. You can fish them in shallow water. You can fish them slightly deep. And again, the hooks. Again, you might want to replace the hooks, but the hooks are decent enough that you won't bend them out if you're using regular bass tackle.
And maybe loosen your drag a little bit if you're using heavy line and whatnot.
But I know this has nothing to do with spring, but Andrew has this lure in his hand that he's wanting to talk about politely, but I haven't been letting him, so go ahead.
So this is actually a saltwater popper from Rapala, but this is something that I want to catch a muskie on this year. I don't have a muskie popper yet, and poppers for muskie aren't very popular.
They're not popular, but I'm sure they catch fish.
So like walking baits are popular. You have the dive and rise, but I wanted to get a nice a popper for muskie, and that's this with the saltwater graded hooks.
They're huge.
I have no issue casting for muskie. But again, if you have topwater baits in the spring, is it their most productive form of fishing? Maybe not, but it can work. Muskie are looking up a lot of the time. They have a duckling come across the surface, or they have a muskrat swimming the surface. Even with Vlad's words, if to spot a muskie, you see them feeding on something. All those things were surface feeding.
Yep.
And they're I know you've seen like this a blue heron get eaten by a big muskie. Like they will hit some insane stuff. So don't be afraid to cast something like a topwater. If you have a Zara spook, get some heavier grade hooks, throw it on there, and you can cast like, or the Magnum spook. You might already have one of those for bass.
Yeah.
Don't feel ashamed or don't pass up using something like that, or bring one with you if you're fishing an area. Bring it over top of the weeds, because again, that can elicit a reaction strike, walking the bait on the surface or popping it.
And a reaction bite, again, it's a forced bite. They're not going to look up and be like, oh, I'd react to that if it was bigger.
Yeah.
They're going to react to it no matter the size. Like, again, we've been fishing lily pads with small frogs for bass, and just have bass like cartwheel or muskie come up, cartwheel up, and then snip our frog off. And we're talking like a 3-inch frog all the time. Probably 3 or 4 times a summer I get scissored off by a 40-inch muskie.
Yeah.
All the time. And they come up for that little tiny frog, and they will swim. You'll see the wake come. They swim from 10, 20 feet to hit this little frog.
Yep.
So don't be shy to chuck something small. But I say if you're beginning muskie fishing, and even in not the spring, but like early season muskie, topwaters are effective.
Yep.
And one of the most, I'd say the easiest topwater for any muskie guy or girl to get into is a plopper.
Yeah.
This particular one is a tyrant plopper. It's not a big one. Again, you can get massive ones. This particular one is, I'd say it's only like, 4.5 inches long?
Yep.
You can get whopper ploppers that are slightly bigger. I've done good with the Berkeley Chopo, the biggest size they have.
Yes.
Definitely replace the hooks.
Yes.
With bigger hooks. Actually, last year, I caught a really quick story. I was fishing this river that had muskie in it, and I was fishing big muskie baits. This is a perfect story, even though it wasn't June. I was fishing big muskie baits, nothing. And I was like, what the heck, So I was using my muskie rod, but I tied on the Berkeley Chopo, the biggest one, which is literally, I think it's only an ounce. Yeah. It's not a big muskie bait at all. It's actually like...
Well, it's not a muskie bait.
It's not a muskie bait. It's not even a big bass bait.
Yeah.
And I chucked that out, and within 10 minutes, I smacked a muskie. It just wanted something small. That was literally the deal. I'd been fishing the river, nothing. And then within a few hours, I actually hooked multiple muskie, and I got one in. So definitely check out that. Again, you don't need to use big baits. Spring. Yeah. I think that's the main takeaway from this particular part of this episode is you don't have to go out and buy big muskie baits if you're just getting into it. Pick out some large bass lures. That's what you're going to look for, or generally better, small muskie baits.
If you get a large bass lure, buy some heavy grade hooks, swap them out. Even things like, for example, a jerk bait. So what often we'll do is these hooks here aren't muskie rated. These are good hooks
for bass.
For bass, but they're not even pike. Could easily do a pike on that. But for muskie, you get into a 30-inch plus muskie, which isn't huge. But they'll start bending that out easy. Yeah. So what you can do is you can take off all the hooks and put on 2 larger trebles on just the rear and the very front eyelet here. That way it still keeps its balance, because essentially you're taking the same amount of weight, just upsizing 2 hooks. And so it'll help keep it balanced in the water still, but now you have better or higher quality, higher grade hooks to be able to land that muskie.
For sure. And again, you might be like, you know what? I don't really care about the hooks. Like I'll replace them when they get bent out. That's fine. Like I know a lot of guys that fish and they just use regular bass hooks, and then they're like, oh, my hooks got bent out, and they just put new hooks on. I don't want to be in that situation where I hook my personal best huge, like imagine you hook like a high 40s or 50-inch muskie.
Yeah.
Just because you put on bass hooks and it bent out right beside the boat.
Yeah.
Don't make stupid mistakes like that. Especially when muskie fishing, they're a fish of 10,000 casts. When you actually hook that fish, I want everything to go perfectly after that. Yeah. As much as I can. Because you still have to get the fish to the boat. Hooking the muskie is the first part. Getting it in the net is a different part.
And one thing I want to work on this year, I'm not sure exactly how much you're going into it, but we're talking a lot about the tackle. For the technique, whenever I'm fishing, whatever lure I'm using, my goal this year is I want to try and get that reaction strike. Because again, we cast mostly for muskie.
Yeah.
Trolling, you're not going to get a reaction strike because it's a steady retrieve constantly behind the boat as it's trolling. But when we're casting, I think you told me before, 90% of the fish will either hit within the first 10 feet of your cast
or the last
10 feet of your cast. Yeah. So very rarely do they hit midway on a retrieve. And that's just because it's just constant. They're following it because they're intrigued by it. They're interested. But once it gets to the boat, that's when you're, okay, now I'm going to start my figure 8. Now you're imparting action. Now you're all of a sudden you're speeding it up. You're changing direction. All of a sudden, what are you doing? You're taking a regular cast and retrieve bait and you're making it a reaction bait.
Yep.
So my goal this year is whatever I'm doing, I want to focus on trying to get reaction strikes throughout my cast rather than just, hopefully they bite right away or I'll have to get them on the figure 8. because I know last year we had a couple days where, like, they were good days. We caught some fish, but there's a one day especially we went out and we saw what was it, 11 fish.
Yeah,
we caught one each.
Yeah, which is fantastic.
But the other, we raised 9 to the boat, I think, and we only caught 2. And we tried, not again.
I botched a figure 8 though really bad. I had a muskie. I literally saw it grab my bucktail, but my rod was in the wrong position. You got to really practice that.
Yeah.
If you mess anything up, it's done.
But they would come up, see the boat, and leave.
And it was clear water though.
Clear water. But again, I would like to see, personally, if I can see an improvement in catching muskie, if I can get a reaction. And I'm not the guy that thought of this. This was actually from, they call him the Doc. What's his name? Gord Pizer.
Yeah.
And so he was talking about that on a podcast on actually the Outdoor Journal Radio podcast with Angelo Viola and Pete Bowman. So I've been listening to that recently. But anyways, they were talking about muskie, and I thought that's just a really good point, and something that I want to try too, is getting a reaction strike throughout the cast rather than just hoping it doesn't get spooked when it's by the boat.
Exactly. And like you said, if you're just casting and retrieving baits that you won't get a reaction strike with when you're reeling it to the boat is spinner baits, bucktails, stuff like that. But if you're noticing that the fish are spooking when they're getting to the boat, baits that are constantly causing reactions all the way to the boat would be like a glide bait.
Yep.
Because a glide bait, you're zigzagging it or you're jerking it side to side all the way back to the boat. That is a reaction bait. Another bait is a diving rise, a suic. Constantly, the whole time, it
floats up,
causing
all of a sudden
reactions.
jerks forward, floats up, or a big rubber bait. You can fish those. Again, they're sinking down, and you jerk it up,
or you rip it through the weeds. That's causing a reaction bite. Question, quick: if you were going muskie fishing, say we're going out in early season, and you can only bring 2 baits, the confidence baits for you, and those are the only 2 baits you can fish all day, what are they going to be?
I would say it's going to be a small bucktail.
Yep. Like what is it? The Mepps Muskie Killer size
Muskie Killer
bucktails?
or Black Fury or or even like the Phantom Martin has the musky one. Yep. I'd use one of those, and I would probably go with just because I like a topwater, I would probably go with a small suic, a small diving rise, just because I want to have the option of that topwater strike.
So you're gonna fish a suic like a topwater?
Well, I guess, but if you're saying confidence, then I would have to say probably like a jerk bait.
Okay. Like a minnow bait.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah. So I would say similar for myself. So I was going to say a suic or a diving rise, but because you can fish a crankbait in a similar way, I'd probably pick a 6-inch jake or like a 6-inch minnow bait, because I can fish it right under the surface. I can crank it down a bit. I can fish it like a diving rise. I can, jerk it down, let it float up. And it's a small enough bait that I can cast that thing all day and, not be sore. And then my other bait that I would pick is I would probably pick a small spinner bait.
Yeah.
And with those 2 baits, I feel like I can cover anything I get to in shallowish water for June. Because like spinner bait around weeds, and then jerk bait for anything else. And
as soon as, and as I said, when you're saying spring, the reason why I didn't go with a more weedless bait is because oftentimes, again, muskie, June, it's still pretty late in the season. Weeds are coming up, but there's still a lot of water you can cover without having to cast right into the weeds.
They're still like super thick yet.
And they're maybe not all the way to the surface. So as long as you can retrieve above them, you can still cover that water. As soon as it gets a little bit later in the season, I'm going to want something that can cast into those weeds. So 100% I'd bring dive and rise, because they'll pull into the weeds and pull out, or a big weedless frog even.
Yeah. Actually, we both bought those Spro King Daddy. It's a weedless frog for bass, but it's a 1 ounce with 6-aught hooks.
Big.
It's either a big bass bait, again, or a small muskie bait. Yeah. Now, hey, you might catch 1 or 2 muskie on it before it gets completely chotched with teeth holes, but hey, I'm willing to spend, $20 on a frog if I can catch 2 muskie on it, if they're good fish. But anyway, those are some of the things that, we've kind of accumulated over the years and from our experience fishing. And again, we're Kawartha based, so if you live in Northern Ontario, it might be a little different for you. The Shield Lakes are very different than the Kawartha Lakes or the St. Lawrence or Lake St. Clair or other musky places that are, like that. But generally, muskie spawn in the same areas.
Yes.
So take that with a grain of salt. Again, I think with muskie fishing with us, I like how it was, because I've caught muskie over the years, not fishing for them. But once we started fishing for them, we started catching them. Yeah. And we had to do a lot of research, a lot of homework, talked to a lot of people, and we started catching them.
Jesse has caught way more muskie than me.
Andrew's caught bigger
But
ones.
I've caught bigger muskie. In fact, all of my muskie are bigger than Jesse's personal best.
It's true. But that changes this year.
That's not to say that I'm good. I've just been fortunate with the muskie I've happened to catch.
Extremely dumb beginner's luck. But before we end, we're going to talk about gear quick because we forgot. So like we said, if you're using some of the smaller baits we're talking about, and you're fishing for smaller muskie, this is the only time I'd recommend using non-muskie tackle.
Yeah.
Because again, if you overplay muskie, especially in the summer, they can actually die. They may swim away, but they actually can die from overexertion. So for me, I actually have some specific bass tackle that I do use for muskie. I have a 7.5 foot extra heavy. It's actually my punching rod. I use it for punching thick cover for largemouth. It's rated up to 2 ounces, which is, again, a lot of these baits, the smaller baits we're talking, they're under 2 ounces. And I load I have a bait casting reel, a larger size, like a 200 size, not a little bass one. And I load that up with 50 or 65 pound braid, and that can literally chuck anything, any small bait. And guess what? It's a stiff rod. You can catch any muskie on that rod generally. Small muskie, yes. Another rod that I bought, or Andrew has a swim bait rod.
Yeah, so I have I bet it's just a heavy swim bait rod, but the swim bait rods have a bit more backbone than your regular like heavy casting rod.
I think yours is rated up to like 4 ounces.
So I can cast almost any of these baits you see on the table, even some of the larger ones. And again, they're designed to be because swim baits often have thicker gauge hooks. You can get those into the mouth of that muskie too, which is nice. And that's actually what I caught my first muskie on, was the swim bait rod. Actually, that was my old Fenwick. But my second muskie I caught was on the swim bait rod, which I caught on that spinner bait. So again, it was effective. I was able to successfully land. That was a 40-inch muskie.
Yep.
That one there.
Boat side.
Yeah, on the figure 8, and he was jumping and stuff like that. But wasn't a long fight. I think that rod handled it really well.
Yep.
For doing that. And I would say that's probably the extent that I would target muskie with. Again, we were fishing a lake where 40 is a good size muskie out of that lake.
Yeah. And that being said, if you are fishing, if you're say a bass angler or a pike angler, and you want to get a rod that has overlap between bass and muskie, a swim bait rod can be good because you can chuck big bass lures on it and small muskie lures on it. That being said, there is a big difference in toughness and durability compared from a swim bait rod all the way up to a muskie rod. Now, the difference is muskie rods are rated different than bass rods. So if you have a heavy or extra heavy swim bait rod, that's literally like a medium heavy or medium muskie rod.
Yeah.
So for instance, I have a 7'10" extra heavy swim bait rod. It's rated 2 to 8 ounces. That's an extra heavy. That's a bass rating. It has a similar rating to a heavy muskie rod. Similar, very similar. So like it depends. So when you hear someone say like, "Oh, I'm using a medium heavy muskie rod," that's not a medium heavy bass rod. That's a medium heavy muskie rod, which is different. A medium heavy muskie rod are generally rated from 1 to 4 ounces.
Yeah.
So
and again, if you are a muskie angler and you do your annual trip to Lake St. Clair, or you have to live on it, what we mainly fish are smaller lakes. And like I said, a 40-inch muskie is great. I don't think our chances are very high at all of ever catching a 50-inch muskie out of the lakes we're fishing.
No, maybe mid 40s, but high 40s would be a stretch.
So again, when we're using a medium heavy or a heavy action muskie rod, that's pretty much the highest we'll go on what we're fishing, just because we want to be able to have to be able to fight that fish effectively. And you still want flex in your rod. If you're using a pool stick to fight smaller fish, your likelihood of losing that fish and or pulling or straightening the hook or snapping the line,
losing
or
them
just
both
throwing
side.
it increases. So you want to have that flexibility. So for us who are fishing, it does make sense, and the guides on these lakes, they agree that that's the kind of gear that you're looking for.
Yeah, if you could, so we do have quite a bit of muskie gear that we've been using over the years. So again, like a medium heavy muskie rod, it sounds light, and if you're fishing big baits, obviously you can't use that because it won't be able to handle it. But I have an 8.5 foot medium heavy. I also have a 7.5, which is a shorter rod. That can handle pretty much a lot of the bait. I'd say like 80% of the baits that you chuck normally. And you can load that up with 65 pound braid or 80. You can cast anything, I'd say up to 3.5 ounces, no problem. If I could only have one muskie rod to do everything, it would be a heavy.
Yep.
Because you can always cast lighter stuff, but you can't cast heavier stuff on a lighter rod. A heavy rod can cast baits generally up to 8 ounces. Generally, I'd say 6 ounces. And then if you're chucking anything bigger than 6 ounces, I would just honestly go to an extra heavy.
Yeah.
But again, we're talking about the average size baits. Again, bass tackle, extra heavy.
And in springtime, you're not casting these big baits.
No.
Ask any muskie angler. You're not casting your biggest baits in the spring.
Yeah. So extra heavy or heavy at the minimum. And then for actual muskie tackle, medium heavy or heavy would be good.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I have a lot of people, when I worked at the fishing store, they want to get into muskie, or say their buddy muskie fishes and they don't know how to use a bait caster. They do actually sell muskie spinning rods.
Yeah.
I'd recommend just learning to use a bait caster, because there's a lot more torque in a bait caster, especially when you're reeling in
It is a
these
superior
big baits.
way of fishing with it. Yes.
That being said, St. Croix does make muskie spinning rods, and pair that up with, like, I don't know, 4,000 or 6,000 size spinning reel. I actually did buy a rod last year. I'll talk about quick. It's a 7-foot heavy. It's not a muskie rod. It's a bass rod. It's a 7-foot heavy spinning rod, and I actually bought it for my wife when we were going on a muskie, like a small muskie lake.
Yeah.
The muskie aren't big. If you caught a 36, it would be a big fish. And that rod's fantastic. You can chuck anything up to 2 ounces on it. So you don't have to have super heavy tackle to catch these fish, especially if you're fishing smaller lakes like we're talking about.
100%.
So we're just going to talk very briefly about essential gear you need for muskie fishing. We're not going to really go into it. We have, again, another muskie podcast coming up, but jaw spreaders, 100%.
Three things you 100% need in a boat are jaw spreaders, long needle nose pliers, and a big landing net.
Yeah.
That's, if you have those, you can 95% of the time successfully land, unhook, and release that fish
Safely.
and have it safely for yourself and for the fish.
And hook cutters.
Hook cutters are the next thing I would get on that list, just because, again, if it's hooked deeply and you want that muskie to survive,
Just cut
the hook. You can replace a hook. It costs you $2, but that beautiful fish can keep living.
And one thing I would say, the pros of having a large net, like we actually bought a really nice Ranger muskie net. It was $200.
We actually split the cost of it because we wanted to have one. So
a
we
good
each
muskie
split it in
net
half.
will last you a lifetime.
Yep.
They have lifetime warranties, and they're worth their weight in gold. It has a super deep bag. Once you get the muskie inside, the great thing about it is the muskie stays in the water.
Yep.
You hold the net on the side, and as you know, after you hook a big muskie, you have the heebie-jeebies. Like, you got to calm down, let the muskie sit in the net.
It's the most exciting, like, adrenaline rush,
especially when it's in the
shaking,
net.
And oh my
and we're
word,
just
it's
like
the best feeling.
Whoa!
Mike Iaconelli style.
Yeah. And then once you calm down a bit, the fish is in the net. You don't have to worry about getting out.
Yep.
And then you can get the hooks out, leave the fish in there, take the fish out for a quick picture, slide it back in the net, and then let it out of the net and let it swim away.
Yeah.
So definitely, even if you're shore fishing, a net is a big deal.
Yeah. And again, if you're trying to bring that fish into the boat to do if you can unhook it outside the boat, keep it in the water for as much as a process as possible.
Yeah.
If it's hooked deep or something like that, and you have to try and cut it, and you have to work a bit harder to get that fish on a safe release, and the best thing is to bring it in. If you don't have a good landing net and you've now tired this fish out, again, it's under more stress, and now you have to try and hook it under its gill plate to bring it in, because where are you going to grab a big muskie? Hopefully not the eye sockets. But if you start pulling up on that gill, you can actually start separating the spine or tearing at their gill raker, or it attaches to the bottom of their jaw, and you can start tearing their jaw, start loosening their spine, and start cracking it. When you're lifting big fish like that,
vertically,
you don't know how to vertically.
Yeah.
So it can be tough. And then even if you're doing it proper, you've got your hand in its razor sharp gill rakers with hooks flying around right by your hand, and you're trying to lift this.
It
big
gets
fish.
sketchy.
So if you have a net, even if it's not a cradle style, again, those are great too. But if you have a big landing net, as soon as you lift it up, it's just holding that whole fish. You don't have to worry about your own safety, the fish's safety. It's good. It's down on the bottom of the boat. You can now work on it a lot safer again. So that is, again, you can't unhook something without pliers, and the mouth spreader gets access to the hook. That net lets you contain that fish safely to do so. Those three things you need muskie fishing.
And I think of all the species in Ontario that you fish for, muskie is probably the one fish that requires the most specialized equipment that you need to have.
Yep.
Like, you can go out bass fishing or walleye fishing and not have to worry about, jaw spreaders or hook cutters.
Like
or
we
this
talked
or
about
that.
carp. You can go fishing for carp, and very little you have to get in order to modify your gear that you already own to go for it.
Yeah.
But muskie, if you only have a medium heavy bass rod, don't target muskie.
Yeah.
Please don't.
Big ones anyway. So there's muskie fishing for us. Again, we're only average anglers, and every time we muskie fish, it's a learning experience. Every year we get a little bit better. We've consistently started to catch them consistently the last few years.
Yeah.
Which is great. I mean, I'm really happy with that. But it's definitely a learning experience. There are a few guys out there that just slam them. It's definitely not
one of
us.
the hardest fish to learn, because on bass, if you have a bad day, like the odd time you get skunked. But if you go bass fishing at the end of the year, you've had your good days, your bad days, you only caught maybe 1 or 2, and your good days are you caught 50 or 100. And you get a lot of learning experience. With muskie, you could go a full week. You maybe like raised one fish and you're like, wow, I learned from that one time I saw a fish. It's just a slow learning curve on muskie fishing. So if you're getting into it, don't get discouraged that you're not seeing results, because even advanced muskie anglers will have long lulls between actually getting what might consider results from their trips.
It's definitely a hero or zero kind of fish. So again, we're talking smaller baits will help you get more opportunities. They'll get more follows. You'll catch more fish. They may not be giant fish, but a muskie's a muskie, as they say. Even the smallest muskie is a muskie.
And the smaller muskies generally have bolder color patterns, and they look really nice.
Yeah, actually, one of the most beautiful muskies I ever caught was like 20 inches long. It was a little baby.
And the spotted muskie or the bars, they're so much darker on the smaller ones. Yeah. And generally the bigger ones, a lot of the time, they're just clear. Or those bars, you start to drop away, and it just goes like a clear muskie. Great looking fish still. And the size is crazy. But the small ones have those like patterns, which are really nice.
For sure. So anyway, we would like to plug our podcast episode sponsor again, Beeline Baits.
Yeah.
Again, all these giveaways I want to win myself, because again, we don't get any of this
Jesse
stuff.
says I can't enter, and I just think that's wrong.
Yeah, Andrew can. I can't enter either. But again, he's giving away 4 perch swim baits and custom chatterbait, a big musky chatterbait to go on that.
And if you don't want to use a chatterbait and you want a more smaller size approach, again, for spring with these things, that's a great size rubber swim bait. You can just take a big beast hook.
Yep.
A big like 8/0, 10/0 even.
Yeah, I think
and just rig that.
8/0 for that size is perfect. I have similar size swim baits, 8/0.
And you can use that, and that's a perfect spring size rubber swim bait.
Yeah, and
that
again,
you could just rig on its own.
Use it the whole year too, but definitely good in early season. But we'd like to thank you for that. So to enter our giveaways now, they're only on Instagram. So if you don't follow us on Instagram, follow us. You have to follow our stories, and we're going to do...
And you still have to keep listening.
Yep. You got to keep listening, because what we do is we ask a question about this podcast or whatever podcast the giveaway is from, and you have to answer in a question and answer box on our Instagram stories to win these giveaways. So that's how you do it, and that's how you win. And like I say, it pays to listen to the Average Ontario Anglers podcast. So I had a few people being like, well, what? It's not fair that I have to listen to the podcast. I was like, it's not fair that you don't have to listen to the podcast to win podcast prizes. That's literally how it works. But anyway, I thought that was a cool episode, because I'm really excited about muskie fishing. And again, to shout out the hats, Muskie Maniacs, have no affiliation with them. Just love the hats.
Yep. This is my second one. I love it. I fit really comfortable.
And I think that was his good luck charm the last few years, catching big muskie. So hopefully this year it works for me. 50-incher. But anyway, if you've listened this far, thanks. Again, we'd like to ask you to write us a review on Spotify or YouTube if you're listening on YouTube, as well as Apple. We have a lot of reviews, but the more reviews we get, the better it is for getting sponsored content in the future. So thanks for listening, and we will catch you on the next episode.